Father Boyle has been a friend of mine for the last 10 years or so. Really had looked to him and what they were doing down in Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. Brief snapshot, 30 seconds, and then I'll let him tell the stories. Homeboy Industries is the largest gang intervention program in the country and really around the world. They are a leader in the field. And Father Boyle has been a friend and mentor to me. Every time I'm out in LA, he takes time to catch up, meet with the team, encourage us. If you have never read his book, Tattoos on the Heart, it's an amazing, really picture of the DNA of the work that we're trying to do. And I'm going to give a shameless plug that Father Boyle has a new book coming out next week. And so be sure to check that out. He's been trying to write it for the last 10 years, so he finally did it. We're excited. But without further ado, will you give it up for Father Greg Boyle?
Love you, brother. Thank you, Matt. I've lost my voice, so I'm going to do the best I can. I've already turned my clock back, so we're good. It's only 7:20. No hay pedo. It's a real privilege to be here. It's a privilege to know Sarah and Matt and all the folks at Urban Life Skills, and it's been a very treasured friendship for the last 10 years. And it's been a privilege to walk with them in this movement. It's been the privilege of my life for 30 years to have worked with gang members and have known thousands and upon thousands of them who have changed me, have altered my heart and reshaped my way of seeing. People like Hector, a 16-year-old gang member who was a knucklehead into his barrio and putting in work and dropped out of school a long time ago. And then he came to work for Homeboy Industries, and he discovered how smart he was and went back to school and at our school, and then was working and making his feriacita every day, had a reason to get up in the morning. So he was kicking in my office, he was making small talk, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I ran into a man who attended one of your talks." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yes. He found your talk rather monotonous." I said, "Seriously?" "Well, no, actually that didn't happen, but I need practice using bigger words." I said, "Please practice on someone else." The movement that Matt was talking about, I think, is about this vision, God's dream come true, where we create together in Little Village and in Chicago and in this country a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. We imagine with God a circle of compassion, and then we imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We together dismantle the barriers that exclude. And so we go to the margins, because if you go to the margins, look under your feet. The margins are getting erased because you chose to go there. And you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And you stand with those whose dignity has been denied. And you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And every once in a while, you have this exquisite privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I suspect if kinship happened to be our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. The problem in the world, Mother Teresa suggested, was that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And Urban Life Skills reminds us of that truth and stands against forgetting it. So we go to the margins and we brace ourselves because some folks may accuse us of wasting our time. But in this place, Jeremiah writes, of which you say there is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. This movement, embodied so beautifully in these last 10 years in Little Village, is about allowing those voices to get heard. The homies have taught me so much, and it's hard to enumerate it all. A lot of times it comes by way of their unique way of mangling the English language. I had a homegirl named Lisa, a trainee in our program, and she wanted to introduce her man to me. So she came to my office and she said, "This is my sufficient other." I said, "No doubt." I was celebrating the Eucharist, saying Mass at Juvenile Hall, San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and about 500 gang members there, and I was, sitting, I was vested, and I was listening to the word being proclaimed, and I had one of those hojas that had the readings in English and Spanish, and I thought, I'm not going to read along, I'm going to listen to the word proclaimed by the homies. So I put it on my lap, and a guy got up, and he was reading from the Psalm, and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." I said, "What the hell?" And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking, wow, that's way better. Because the exalted God is the one created in our image, because that's what we would want. But the exhausted God, the extensive God, the God who loves us without measure and without regret, the God too busy loving us to have any time left over for disappointment. The exhausted God is better. So endless are the ways that the homies have taught me what kinship is, what connection. Thousands and thousands of rival enemy gang members have worked side by side in our 9 social enterprises, have found healing in a community of tenderness. But they've taught me, especially the last few years, how to text, and I'm so grateful to them because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good LOL and OMG and BTW, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, "Oh, hell no." And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. And I know I'm not alone in being vexed by this autocorrect thing. So a homegirl named Bertha, she texted me and she said, "Where you at?" And I said, "I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas," nuns, sisters. "I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas." And I pushed send. Autocorrect told her I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas, which she thought was pretty interesting, actually. The homies even here, I was in St. Louis the last 2 days in here, and they're blowing up my phone. Their hair is on fire. They need, some feria to completar su renta, and they need lo que sea. They need money. They're going to cut off my lights or whatever. So a homie needed $100 for his rent. I didn't have it. So I texted him, "Things are tight." And I pushed send. Autocorrect told him, "Thongs are tight." And he wrote me back, "Sorry to hear that." What about my rent? So there I am in a car with 2 older vatos who work at Homeboy, Manuel and Poncho. They're going to help me give a talk. Manuel's in the front seat. He gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles. And I said, what is it? He goes, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers. It's a tough job because gang members can be attitudinal. So I said, what's he say? Oh, it's dumb. Hang on. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now. Show them they got the wrong guy. Well, I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. We laughed so hard. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other because I remember. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? Everyone in this room is engaged in service, and it's a good place to start. But service is the hallway that leads to the ballroom. You want to get to the ballroom, which is the place of exquisite mutuality. You want to get to the place where there is no daylight that separates us. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend. And once famously, a reporter had commented to him and said, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual. And that's the hope. A hardcore gang intervention worker in Houston kind of pleaded with me. He was a former gang member himself. He says, how do you reach them? And I said, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all a cry for help. We're all in need of healing. It's what joins us as members of the human family. In 30-year history at Homeboy, no homie had more opportunities given to him than this guy we all called Dreamer. I knew him since he was a mocosito and growing up in the projects. Got into a gang, and smart kid, dangerous sense of humor. Though I don't think he ever went to school, actually. But he's in his 40s now doing well, but in his early 20s, he was a yo-yo, in and out of prison, in and out of jail. I'd find him a job in the private sector or in one of our 9 social enterprises. And he'd always kind of real quickly gravitate back to vague criminality, something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of. And then he'd wander back to me. So this one time he finished a 4-month stretch in probation violation in county jail, and there he is sitting in front of my desk. And he says what gang members often say, this time it'll be different. I said, okay. So I picked up the phone, I called a friend of mine named Gary who hired homies in the past. Maybe he'll do it again. And he does. He says, you tell that guy he can start tomorrow. That's a holy man. So Dreamer began work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, he's in my office sitting in front of my desk. I go, híjole madre santa, here we go all over again. But this time he pulls out of his pocket his very first paycheck and he waves it proudly. And he says, damn, G, this paycheck makes me feel proper. My mom, she's proud of me. My kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, God. Who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, well, God, of course. Oh, sure, no. That would be God, yeah. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. Them Genesis days. He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. Well, we fell out of our chairs dying laughter. And I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. I have no idea. It's mutual. Everyone a part of this movement, and that's everybody in this room. All of us are called to be enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. At Homeboy Industries, we're allergic to the notion of hold the bar up, ask them to measure up. And the main reason is our exhausted God never asks that of us. Why would we ask that of them? Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth, and my truth is a gang member's truth. It's all the same truth. Here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch as folks on the margins in particular, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it, no 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But everybody in this room knows you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. The Acts of the Apostles says something very odd and very helpful. And awe came upon everyone. It would seem that the measure of our health as a community may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So some years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. I said yes. I knew it was a gang in-service from 9 to 5. I figure maybe I'll open the conference, maybe I'll speak at lunch, maybe I'll close the thing. Oh, I bought my ticket a week before I was to leave. I pull out the letter, and to my horror, I discover that I am to be the only speaker the whole damn day from 9 to 5. And I said, oh, hell no. So I called 2 homies in, trainees, gang members, Andre and Jose, and I sat them down and I said, look, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time, because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose got up first, and he said, I guess you could say, he was 25 years old, and so he was a trainee in our 18-month program. He finished his time there working, a very valuable member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery, gang member, been to prison, but he also had a long stretch of time as a homeless man, even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of these 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. He said, and we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. He said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California and she walked me up to an orphanage. She knocked on the door. The guy came to the door and she said, "I found this kid." And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. "Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts?" Then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, "I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds?" And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service to those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is, if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. Let me end with this last story. I think it's important sometimes for us to ask ourselves, what kind of praise does our exhausted God have any interest in? So it occurs sometimes to universities to force their students to read my book against their will. And I'm not complaining, but so Gonzaga University, my alma mater in Spokane, forced the freshmen to read it. So they said, "Could you come and speak?" And they said, "Could you bring 2 homies with you?" And I always do if they're going to pay for it, and I always pick homies the same way. I always pick rivals, enemies who work in our program, just to force them to share the same hotel room just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. And recently I flew to DC with 2 older vatos, and one guy said, "Hey, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time?" I said, "Well, yes, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American." So I picked 2 guys, Bobby, an African-American gang member who worked in the bakery, and Mario, who at the time worked in our merchandise store. And I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, and I've never had anybody like this guy, Mario. He was so terrified. He was totally paniqueado. He was hyperventilating. We hadn't even boarded the plane yet. And so we go to Burbank Airport, small airport with big bay windows, Southwest Airlines. They don't have that hermetically sealed chute to get on the plane. You have to walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president, and you climb up the steps to the front of the plane and the steps to the back of the plane. It's big planes, you know. And so I'm sitting there with Mario. Bobby's off walking somewhere, and our plane arrives. It's early morning, and I go, that's our plane, and like this, and I go, oh my God, he may die before we actually climb up those stairs. So then I see our flight crew arrives, and I see 2 female flight attendants with very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the stairs. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So I should tell you that Mario, in my 30-year history, is the most tattooed individual who has ever worked at Homeboy. He's all sleeved out. His neck is blackened with the name of his gang. Head shaved, covered in tattoos. Forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids. And I'd never been in public with him, and he and I were walking through the airport, and people are like this, you know, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely. And I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting, because if any of you were to go to Homeboy on Monday and ask anybody there, who's the kindest, most gentle, tender soul who works here, they won't say me. They'll say Mario. He works at the counter at the bakery selling baked goods. Yeah, Mario. He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, and there's the big talk Tuesday night with 1,000 people. But what they don't tell you is they have like 93 other talks during the day, you know, this class, this lunch, this meeting, all day long. And I tell these 2 guys, I'm not going to speak at any of them. I'll sit in the back of the classroom. You get up and tell your stories. So they were nervous, but they did a good job. Stories of torture and terror and violence. Stories of every imaginable kind of abuse. If their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. So the nighttime comes, and I said, look, I'm going to change it up a little bit here. I want you guys to get up before me, do a little 7-minute snapshot of your lives so that I can include you in the question and answer period afterwards. They were nervous, especially Mario, but they did a good job. So I did my thing, and then I invite them up. And they're on either side of me, and I go, yeah, questions. Yes, ma'am. And a woman stands. And she says, yeah, I have a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. And Mario's this tall, skinny drink of water, and he clutches the microphone. Yes. And he's just terrified. And she goes, well, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter, and they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes, and he just clutches the microphone, and I can feel the emotions rising to the top, and he's just trembling, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say, you know. And when suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those 2 words, he retreats back to his microphone, clutching, terrified retreat, with his eyes closed, and he's losing the battle against his tears, but he wants to get this sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. And she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had decided to return him to himself. But they, in turn, were returned to themselves, which shouldn't surprise us, because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. The movement that you are about is nothing less than choosing to be souls who ventilate the world with tenderness. And you do it at the margins. You go there not to make a difference. You go there so that the folks at the margins make you different. And pretty soon you cease to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. We go from this place tonight to allow those voices to be heard. And may God bless you.